Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Allen, and I'm joined by my podcast partner, Bob Duff. And this is the hockeydebates.com podcast. We come to you twice a week. And in the first part, we usually talk about all things hockey. And then in our second show of the week on Thursday, we usually talk about betting within the sports. But Bob, even in the midst of this pandemic, there are a few hockey stories that are kind of floating around, and one that Elliot Friedman, the excellent reporter, came up with is the fact that, and even though he cautions us that this is spitballing by people around the league, that should it come to the possibility of maybe having to play in non-traditional arenas, in other words, looking for neutral sites, that perhaps the University of North Dakota might be a place they might go. It's a beautiful arena there. I've been there. The World Juniors were there several years ago, and it's a gorgeous arena, and the training facilities are NHL caliber. The weight rooms, and in fact, they're much larger than I've seen in NHL arenas. I don't know. What's your thoughts on the idea? The NBA has been saying now that one of the things that they might consider is, playing every game in Vegas. And I think the reason we're doing this, or neutral sites, is I think there is a reasonable belief that, we're either going to play with no fans or very few fans once we returned. And, I know MLB, I've read stories suggesting they might play their games in their spring training facilities as opposed to, their major league stadiums. So what's your thought on the idea of opening back or coming back in neutral sites?
Well, I think you nailed it right off the bat when you said this is spitballing. And we're just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing if anything will stick. I think at this point, we're still operating in a void. We don't really know how long this virus is going to last, how much more virulent it's going to get. It certainly seems like in the U.S. it's a long way from hitting its peak. And, can you really say for certain that, in June, I noticed today the PGA Tour announced a revised schedule starting with the Memorial Tournament, absent of fans in late June, and playing the U.S. Open and the Masters in September, basically, in late August, early September. And, I understand that everybody wants to see optimism. We'd love to see sports back. It's what we do. But I think you got to be realistic, too. And suppose they do this. And one of the reasons I guess they like North Dakota is because it's, I believe, the least populated state in the U.S. So there's a lot less people around. It sounds to me like they're leaning toward no fans in the stadium wherever they play it. And one of the issues apparently with North Dakota is there enough hotel space to, take all those NHL teams and their support staffs and house them for that long of a period of time. Because if you're going to play the whole playoffs there, you're looking at, almost 2 months. So I don't know. I guess it's nice to have something to talk about and to have hope. You always should have hope. But I think realistically, if they do this and a whole bunch of players get sick and, God forbid someone gets really sick and dies, it's just going to be vilified forever. And I think at this point, I don't think anybody can say, yeah, this is what's going to happen. None of us know.
Well, no, for sure. I don't even think we're anywhere close to the NHL announcing any plans. Like I think it's almost ludicrous to even speculate on what may happen because we don't even know. I mean, today the news is that Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister in the UK, is moved to intensive care, and he's fighting the virus. And every day, even though there is some hope in some of the hot spots in the United States, that we're getting approaching the possibility that we can see that we might be able to flatten the curve. We're still a long way away, and there is, I can tell you from having been to this arena in North Dakota, there is a quaintness to it. I can certainly verify that you're not going to find NHL caliber hotels there, at least not many of them. They're used to staying at hotels that are, would be rated, 5 stars. And, I mean, we all know, I mean, the Marriotts, the Westins, the sort of elite hotels, and they simply don't have it. The town is just too small. It's just a small, college, town. But, one thing I would kind of remind people is that we got to be, when this comes to pass, that we have to sort of be accepting of whatever happens. I think we just have to be happy to get hockey back. But saying all that, I do agree with you that we have to be careful. I mean, will this require every player to be tested to make sure? If so, are we going to routinely test the players to make sure there's not someone out there who is going to pick up the virus? Because you're right. We all have experience in sort of knowing what happens when, flu sweeps through the NBA and the NHL, because it does happen every winter. This is obviously far more dangerous and is more easily, transmitted. I mean, that's the concern. Like initially, I think a lot of us, I know I consider myself one of those people that thought, maybe we can play and have the PGA, without fans, because these players can stay apart. But you do have issues like, pulling, the ball out of a cup where everybody's going to put their hand in there. I would think if you're going to do this, you have to tell players you get to use a different ball every hole, and then one man or person wearing a glove would remove the golf ball from the hole and remove the pin using a glove, and then put the pin back in. That's the only way I think you could assure safety. In Michigan, we're locked down here, and the golf courses are closed just because of that reason. Even if you walk the course, and you'd have to. And some have suggested, well, you turn the hole upside down, and then you couldn't do this with pros, but for the average golfer, you just need to hit the cup, and then that's good, and you can still play. But apparently that did not persuade our governor, who said, no, golf courses are not essential and we're not closed. And we should be thankful on that. So, boy, what a complicated deal. If it could come to pass, though, let's just say that we get lucky, and right around August they say we can play, and the MLB says, we'll figure out a way to have 100-game season, and hockey's going to have some type of playoff tournament. The NBA is, going to play. We should all just be accepting of whatever they figure out, because I think even though it isn't going to be the same way we always award the Stanley Cup winner, at least we'll have a champion, and we'll put an asterisk by it, but it'll be memorable. I've said continuously that if we had a 31 team NHL playoff format that went single elimination until the semifinals, and then it was best of 7, I think that would be quite memorable. And, will it make everyone happy? Well, no. But, I think we're going to have to accept what we get and be thankful to get it, when we do.
Yeah, maybe what they could do with the golf tournaments, you're not going to need all those guys holding the quiet signs when there's no fans. So you arm those guys with Lysol wipes and spray bottles, and they rush out after every group comes up and spray down the flag and wipe it down and clean up the hole and that. So, there's a whole army of volunteers that usually do other jobs that aren't going to be needed for a tournament without fans. So maybe that's the solution right there.
Yeah, or, and as I said, if everyone was just allowed to use a new ball in every hole, I mean, the guy reaches in, he cleans the flag, gets that all squared away, but he takes that ball and, just like they do in the doctor's office with a hazardous waste, they put that ball in a container, and we don't see that ball anymore. And, I believe they can afford 18 golf balls. So now it's not sort of keeping with, and you know what, you obviously don't need to play with the same ball, because we've seen, players throw the ball away. Or I guess that's after the tournament when they throw in the stands, isn't it? So, well, I don't even know what the rules are, to be honest with you, for doing that. But, we could certainly, figure out how to do it. But, one thing, Bob, just sort of getting away with from the virus, I think we're all a little virus weary. But what's going to have to be decided, this would be, in my opinion, a much bigger story had we not be dealing with sheltering in place. But, what is going to happen with Henrik Lundqvist? And, the Rangers have two quality young goalies who clearly are the future. This is a rebuilding team. But here we have Henrik Lundqvist, who, in my mind, has been Mr. Ranger for a long time and is fully committed to this organization. Even when they announced the rebuild, he said, I'll plow through, I'll be part of it, and has always done the right thing. I have gone to the national media tour every fall, and he's always there or there most years. And I always look forward to my one-on-one interview with Henrik Lundqvist because he's thoughtful in his answers, and he gives a lot of thought. And I remember asking him last fall about would he go home to Sweden when he's done playing, because traditionally that's what people do. I mean, Nicholas Lidstrom, Bob, lived here 2 decades, lived in Michigan, but when his career was up, he left and left Novi, Michigan, where he had lived most of his adult life, and in fact, almost all of his adult life. Yeah, I think he came over here in his early 20s, and just backed up and went home because that's what to do. But Lundqvist said, "No, I feel like I'm a New Yorker." And he said it was his plan that he was going to stay here, and that he wanted to be a lifetime Ranger and then retire there and make his home there. And now I wonder if he feels differently. And I think it's something I think that they're going to have to sit down, they being the Rangers and Lundqvist, and figure out, because you can say, and people have speculated that, well, we'll just have some measure of agreement and then he'll retire. But does Henrik Lundqvist really need to retire? I think he's still an okay goalie. I mean, I think he's an above average goalie. I think he's got, could he, for example, be what the Carolina Hurricanes have been, looking for? Could he be the guy that could transform the Calgary Flames? There are other teams looking for goalies as well. And I think he's going to have to make a decision about, does he want to leave the Rangers organization and go on? Or I just don't feel he's ready to retire. And I think it's he's in a bad sort of situation. And I think the Rangers are too, because you don't want to be, in my opinion, accused of behaving badly and severing your ties with a guy like Lundqvist, who, has done nothing but be a model citizen for the Rangers.
And I think, you look at the Ray Bourque scenario, I think it's possible that he could have the best of both worlds. He could still be the New York guy that's worshipped for all he's given to the Rangers. You look at Ray Bourque, he left Boston late in his career to go win a Stanley Cup in Colorado and finally get his cup. But now he's back in Boston. He's still, associated with the Bruins. He has a restaurant bar in the Boston area that's very popular. He's still looked upon as a Bruins legend, even though he won his Stanley Cup somewhere else. I think you could pull the same thing off of Lundqvist, unless maybe he went to the Islanders and helped the Islanders win a cup. That might not be forgivable. But I would think any other team, if he went there and won a cup and then retired and came back to New York, he'd still be a huge part of the Rangers alumni. I think he'd still be looked upon as a Ranger, and I don't think that would be an issue. As you say, if it's not an acrimonious, you wonder about what's going to happen with Tom Brady and the Patriots now, because that wasn't a pleasant goodbye when he left for Tampa Bay. And is that going to impact his legacy with the Patriots? Is he going to still be looked upon as the same as he was before he went to Tampa Bay? Because it looks like he kind of engineered that departure and really seemed to give an impression that he wasn't going to leave for much of the off season. So it's a fine line you have to walk when you're talking about that, when guys have been in one place for a long time and then leave. Like, obviously, Henrik Lundqvist, the only thing missing from his resume is a Stanley Cup championship, and I'm sure he wants that before he goes. But if he goes and gets it somewhere else, how does that impact his legacy as a Ranger?
Yeah, and to me, he's a Hall of Famer, even if he doesn't win the Stanley Cup. He has a world championship. And does he have Olympic gold? He does, right? Yeah. Yeah, so he's got the Olympic gold and the world championship. And, he's been, in my mind, a top 5 goalie in the league for an extended period of time. And, he's been durable. And you look at his numbers and, he's performed statistically well. This is like no one's fault. Like, this is what happens. I always say this about, people always, consistently I say that you have to be careful giving goalies long-term deals. And because invariably a young goalie comes up and pushes that veteran, and then oftentimes you can look silly because you have an $800,000 goalie who is the best goalie, and then you have a guy making 6-7 million who is the veteran guy who's lost his net. Even on a temporary basis, it sometimes can look silly. And the problem is, this is the only position where that really happens. Even if you guess wrong about a guy is going to be your number 1 defenseman, he could still be your number 2 or number 3 defenseman. And, maybe you're overpaying him a little, but he's still contributing significantly. And, of course, there are 12 forwards on your team, so there's always plenty of, ice time for forwards. So you're not going to, look bad on a contract there unless the guy simply doesn't perform at all. But with goalie, it's different. You can only play one at a time. You can alternate, but then that looks even worse. So, that's these kind of situations. These young goalies of the Rangers have looked good. And when you're rebuilding, you really don't want a guy in his late 30s. You want those younger, players. So I don't blame the Rangers. I think they've tried to handle this as well as they can. And, it's not like, Lundqvist probably isn't the goalie he was 5 years ago, but I still think he's playing at a high enough level that he could be valuable to another team.
Yeah, and we've seen it historically through hockey. 3 into 2 doesn't go. There's only 2 nets. You can't have 3 goalies at practice because one guy's always standing around doing nothing. And, it doesn't work. Teams have tried to carry 3 goalies, and in the long run, it's just not a formula that can play out. And especially now that you've got the 23-player roster, carrying 3 goalies makes it very difficult. When you get a couple of injuries at defense and forward, and you've got 3 goalies on the roster, well, you've got nowhere to add another body when you need a body to cover for somebody who's hurt. So they do have to solve this problem. I think most people expected them to trade a goalie at the deadline. Most people expected it to be Georgiev, but that didn't happen. And now whenever this season resumes, or if it resumes next year with training camp, they've got an issue because you can't keep all 3 guys on the roster.
Right. Well, and it's not like, if Lundqvist was available this summer to play for another team, it's going to really be a buyer's market because Holtby could be out there as well. I think, who knows? The Capitals may, they were able to get John Carlson done in a similar situation. And maybe they can get Holtby done. But, how much do they really want to pay him? They've got a young goalie as well who's performing well. And, that at this stage of Holtby's career, do you really want to be giving him that lengthy deal, for top dollar? Or you can end up in a situation that I was just talking about. So it's a tricky situation. It almost might be better if Holtby did kind of end up somewhere. And look, that he's another guy. Wouldn't he look good playing with Carolina? I'm always trying to give Mrazek's job away, but Holtby just seems like a better option, even though Mrazek has been better than I think fans in Detroit thought he was going to be. when he went to Carolina. But, same thing with Calgary. Would you see more consistency there if you moved him out? And there's always somebody looking for a goalie that you're not counting on. So, and I'm sure that will be the case. Another sort of newsy item, Bob, and I've been sort of following this. I think everybody has sort of ruled out that Taylor Hall would consider, staying in Arizona, and yet I keep seeing, John Chaika talking like, we fully intend to try to, get him back here, and they were going to talk after the season, but because we're in the midst of this hiatus, I think there's been some discussion on it now, and I think, I guess my question to you is there really any hope that he can? I mean, Taylor Hall has not been, he's with the Oilers and they never were making the playoffs. He goes to the Devils and, that team is just too young. And, he couldn't turn that team around. And now he's in the Coyotes and like they're headed in the right direction, but, they may not even make it in the playoffs this year. And you don't know what their future is going to be like either. Like, do you see any chance that John Chaika could persuade Taylor Hall to stay in Arizona and be really the face of that team, I think, if he stayed there?
I'd have to say no at this point because, if you're Taylor Hall, don't you want to find out what you're worth on the open market and where you can end up? I mean, I saw Taylor Hall as a junior, and his NHL career baffles me because in 2010, when he was with the Windsor Spitfires and they won their second straight Memorial Cup, they were in the Eastern Final against Kitchener, and they were down 3-0 in the series, and they looked dead in the water. And he put that team on his back, and he just said, we're not losing this series. They didn't just not lose that series. They didn't lose another game the rest of the playoffs. They won 4 in a row against Kitchener, swept Barrie in the finals, and then didn't lose a game at the Memorial Cup. And he was just absolutely dominant. And I thought, this guy's going to be a stud in the NHL. And for the most part, he hasn't been. He's had some good years. Certainly had a great year in New Jersey when he won the Hart Trophy. But as you say, he hasn't put teams on his back and carried them places like he did in junior. And he's played for bad teams mostly and hasn't lifted them.
Well, let me just, plant this thought. He really hasn't played well this season. Obviously, he's not the same player he was when he was MVP. And the other thought is look, we may be looking at a 2-season disruption of the salary cap. If we can't play this season, we're going to lose over $1 billion. And I think it's possible that it's going to take some time to refill the arenas, even next season. If we're not going to have a vaccine for this virus, and you already hear experts saying, might have to revisit this in the winter, then are we going to be comfortable going in arenas? Now, we talked about that last show. I'm not going to get into that. But, what we didn't talk about is the economic impact of that. We're still a gate revenue-driven league. There is a tremendous amount of revenue that comes from gate revenue of the $5 billion revenue that's split up by the players and owners. And also, sponsorships are going to be down. The economy in the United States and Canada has been totally upturned by the fact that, we can't operate our businesses. And now there are a lot of people who are unemployed. Are we going to be able to afford the NHL ticket prices, which are, very high, as we all know? So all of that could result, in my opinion, of a sort of a 2-year disruption. Now, obviously the NHL and the Players Association are going to negotiate a little bit and try to figure this out. But there could be some sort of disruption in the force, or in this case, the salary cap. And, in that environment, are you going to give Taylor Hall his true value? So this summer, when you not quite know what's going to happen over the next couple of years, or are you going to try to get him to take a little less? And could the Coyotes win just by saying, hey, look, you come here, you'll be the face of our franchise. We'll pay you now as if nothing's going to happen over the next 2 seasons. And, you get the glorious sun here, even in the winter. It'll be great. Could they, under these circumstances, does Arizona look to be a better option than under normal circumstances?
Well, it's certainly got to be the worst offseason to be a free agent because, as you say, the money's going to be tight. And I don't know how teams are going to afford to go out and sign guys to long-term deals when they don't know what the long-term economics of the league is going to be. And it's really going to be a curiously fascinating offseason this year to see what teams decide to do. As you say, this is a gate-driven league, and I think the worst job in sports right now might be the person that has to sell season tickets for NHL teams because they have to sell them if they're going to pay their bills. And like you say, who wants to go into an arena until they know it's safe? And I saw an interview with Kirk Herbstreit, who's probably as plugged in NCAA football as anybody. And he said he just can't see NCAA football going forward with 70,000 fans in the stadium when they don't have a vaccine. It's the possible tragic outcome that could lead to. And I think every sport's got to look at it like that. I mean, you're probably looking at 12 to 18 months till we have a vaccine. And I would think a lot of people are going to be looking at it that way too. Do I really want to go? And not just sports, concerts, whatever. Do I want to go to a big gathering when there's a realistic chance I'm going to catch this and they don't have a vaccine for it?
Yeah. I just can't help but think, though, that, who knows? He may just, he's a confident guy. He may just say, look, I'll get my money eventually. And, you're so close to free agency, you might as well kind of explore it. But on the other hand, if Chaika was willing to say, look, the confusion over the future be damned, I'm going to give you your market value. And now, because we feel strongly that you can help us, maybe we'll give you a good average salary now, but only for 4 years, and then you come back, you'll just be beyond the age of 30. You can do this all over again in 4 years, and by then maybe the top players will be getting $14-15 million. So I just wonder if they're going to sort of use the confusion to try to suggest that maybe he can get a better deal right now from Arizona, who really kind of feel strongly that they kind of need him to be kind of leading this. And there is a little bit of hope in Arizona. Like, I think Rick Tocchet has done a nice job there of sort of changing the culture. Like, they're a defensive team. They don't score nearly enough goals, and that's one of the reasons why they want Taylor Hall, who's been okay for them, not unbelievable, but he's done what they needed him to do in terms of creating some offense. And I think they think Clayton Keller at some point is going to even blossom into a more significant player. They've got some good young players there, so there's some reason to believe. You can't be sure, but reason to believe that they've sort of turned the corner. So who knows what'll happen there. And before we go, I wanted to ask you too, there's now coaches out there that are, good options. We've got Laviolette, certainly. And, we have Gerard Gallant, who's out there. And forgetting somebody, and there's somebody else too. Pardon me, Babcock 3, but I think there's a 4th. Yeah, well, it'll occur to me, but anyway, like it's almost like normally we'd be talking about that, like what's going to happen. Are we going to see as Calgary, going to stick with an interim coach, with their interim coach, and make him permanent, or is Gerard Gallant going to grab one of these? What happens in Detroit with Jeff Blashill? What's the tea leaves telling you about kind of the coaching off season?
I get the impression that Blashill is going to stay. I think the Wings know they're still far, far away from being a competitive team. And you got to give Blashill something, and he gets these guys to play. I mean, the situation there is as hopeless as it could be with a non-expansion team. But there's just no reason most nights to suspect they can win, and yet they go out there and they play hard every night. And even as the losses mount, they still make a lot of mistakes because they are a young team, and let's face it, they're not a deeply talented team. But you very rarely can question, are they ready to play, and do they play hard? They do that most every night, and I think that's all a coach can do. A coach can't make an untalented player suddenly talented.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, Bob, I'm writing a column this week about who the top five, or I haven't decided, maybe six most important players to the Red Wings rebuild is, and we'll talk about that on our next show. But as usual, we run out of time quickly. This 30 minutes goes much too quickly. So we appreciate you joining us, and we hope you'll join us again on Thursday when we look at other issues and maybe talk a little bit about betting, whatever bets that are still out there. Thanks for joining us.
All right, everybody stay safe. We'll see you Thursday.